morning, and welcome to Community Church of Chesterland, where no matter where you are on life's journeys, you are always welcome here. The Advent services continue on Wednesday evenings, and on next Sunday, December 18th, at 5 p.m. on Chardon Square, there will be a lighting of a menorah. That'll be the first time that that's been done in many, many years.
We're starting to pick back up the book studies and the critical historical examination of the New Testament. Book studies, what we're doing is we're going to kick both of the book studies off with a movie. So the first Wednesday in February, we're going to be watching a documentary called American Heretics, which is basically about the struggle of progressive churches in a very conservative Christian environment. And one of the featured pastors in that is Robin Myers. And he's written several books, and one of those he wrote is called Saving Jesus from the Church. So we're going to do the documentary on the first Wednesday, and then the next 3 Wednesdays, we will be doing a book study around that book. And then in March, first Wednesday of March, we're going to watch a movie called Higher Ground, which is about a woman's true life journey out of fundamentalism into, having a sense of her own agency and moving on in her life without the crutch of fundamentalist Christianity. Search for Higher Ground by the author, which is Carolyn Briggs. Then you will be able to find copies. And then we'll begin the critical historical examination of the New Testament that month as well.
Surprised by Joy by William Wordsworth. Surprised by joy, impatient as the wind, I turned to share the transport. Oh, with whom but thee, deep buried in the silent tomb, that spot which no vicissitude can find. Love, faithful love, recalled thee to my mind. But how could I forget thee? Through what power, even for the least division of an hour? Have I been so beguiled as to be blind to my most grievous loss? That thought's return was the worst pang that sorrow ever bore, save one, only one, when I stood forlorn, knowing my heart's best treasure was no more, that neither present time nor years unborn could to my sight that heavenly face restore.
Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the Christ shall bring, peace on earth and mercy mild, and sinners reconciled. Joyful all you saints arise, join the triumphs of the skies, with the angel host proclaim, Christ is born in Bethlehem. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the Christ child. Christ by highest heaven adored, Christ the everlasting Lord, late in time the Savior comes, offspring of the Virgin's womb, veiled in flesh the Godhead seen. On earth with us to dwell, Jesus our Emmanuel. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the Christ child. God's peace. Hail the Son of righteousness, light and life, our Savior brings, risen with radiant healing wings, loudly laying glory by, born that we no more may die, born to raise us all from earth, born to give a second birth. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the Christ child bring. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the Christ child.
And Mary said, "My soul proclaims your greatness, O God, and my spirit rejoices in you, my Savior. For you have looked with favor upon your lowly servant, and from this day forward, all generations will call me blessed. For you, the Almighty, have done great things for me, and holy is your name. Your mercy reaches from age to age for those who fear you. You have shown strength with your arm. You have scattered the proud in their conceit. You have deposed the mighty from their thrones and raised the lowly to high places. You have filled the hungry with good things, while you have sent the rich away empty. You have come to the aid of Israel, your servant, mindful of your mercy, the promise you made to our ancestors, to Sarah and Abraham and their descendants forever."
The joy of God with us does not come as naive optimism or surface level feel goodness. Joy cannot be imposed from on high. Joy cannot be commanded. The joy of God with us is mingled with grief, exists side by side with mourning, knows that pain and death are all too real, but do not have the final word.
This joy tends tenderly to beauty and softness, and the gladness that comes from paying attention to what matters. The joy of God with us is collective, liberating us from deadly despair. Joy is gestating in darkness. It comes unexpectedly. Joy invites our expectation and demands our participation. Prepare the way for joy with sorrow. May joy be birthed among, within, and through us this Advent. O come, Emmanuel.
Good morning, everyone. I see some new faces here this morning. That's exciting. Now, let's not bury the lead on this third week of Advent. I'm not going to pretend that I'm teasing out some secret message from today's scripture passage, a passage that is very relevant for today, here, now, as we prepare to move into 2023. But it's right there in black and white. We can read it. A text that shares a message of hope and joy for those who are pressing on during difficult times and under oppressive forces. The Song of Mary, the Magnificat. This is a glimpse into the future of divine promises fulfilled, promises of hope and promises of joy and love and peace. And the fulfillment of these promises comes not through a distant or unknowable or mysterious otherworldly force, but through the audacity of someone like Mary, a very young, definitely brown-skinned, mother-to-be, and soon-to-be, within the narrative, a refugee, who claims and relies on the divine power within her. to birth a world where the weary can rest and justice comes to dwell. This is the dominant theological theme of Advent leading into Christmas. It should not really come as much of a surprise to us that Mary and her stunning song, the Magnificat, are at the center of the Advent season, because it is the figure of Mary more than any other biblical figure. Mary is the epitome of waiting in the darkness that Advent symbolically represents. And as has been pointed out in recent weeks, when we talk about the darkness of Advent, we're not speaking of the darkness as a bad or negative, because the divine spirit moves in the darkness. Transformation takes shape within the darkness. The darkness of Advent is a beautiful darkness, a revolutionary darkness. But Mary is not just waiting in the darkness. Now, while there is a discussion to be had, and I would love to have this discussion with anyone who wants to have it, we'll have a beer and we'll talk about whether Mary had any agency or say in being impregnated by God. Was consent given? Narratively, it doesn't read like that, but that's an issue for a different day. We'll grab a beer, we'll talk about it. But at this point in the story, where the Magnificat comes along, not only is Mary now accepting of her role as the mother of the Redeemer, but she also carries the weight, the very heavy weight of having to ensure the survival of this Redeemer, her child's safety and protection and fate. Because within the Christian narrative, during this time, young boys were being slaughtered by King Herod in what came to be called the Massacre of the Innocents, which shows up in the Gospel of Matthew. Now, historically, we know that the Massacre of the Innocents actually never took place, and it's more of a liturgical remembrance or some kind of connective tissue to the Exodus narrative and the death of Egypt's firstborn, that whole plague thing with the Passover, you put the blood on the door, and this is a connection to that story. But whether historically or simply narratively, there's an important side note here, because culturally, these children being killed, these boys would be young black and brown children being murdered by the state, which is a story we don't have to reimagine for modern times. This is a current reality that is lived by many Black and brown families today, immigrants and indigenous people today who are often waiting in their own seasons of darkness that don't seem like they'll ever end, while also carrying, like Mary, the weight for what is to come. And so Mary's story of courage and joy amidst the fear and terror that she was undoubtedly facing at the hands of her own government, this is a powerful and timely reminder of how it is that God brings about liberation in the world today through the courage and the joy and the love that we show and that we practice and that we put out into the world. Because contrary to many political suggestions about change making within the world today, the Magnificat, if you look at it closely, it does not speak of God's power as a form of what we might call trickle-down economics from on high. Mary doesn't sing of how thrones of power are just waiting for that one right candidate to be elected who will magically whisk away all of our pain and suffering. And Mary definitely doesn't sing of the transformative power of the world's largest corporations. And yes, while all things have their place, while the political process and economic models and the work of organizations for the sake of justice are all important elements to the big picture, Mary's song reminds us that revolution and liberation and transformation, these are not granted from the powers that be. Revolution and liberation and transformation are not handed down like crumbs from a table. These rise up. A rising up from within. A rising up of self, a rising up of community, a rising up of love and hope and peace and joy. Our role when we see that love and hope and peace and joy are not being practiced within community, our job is to rise up and make sure that it is being practiced within community. Because we've talked about this before, right? The divine is not a wizard with a magic wand that is waved magically and makes the pain or the evil or the oppression go away. We don't pray for the hungry to be fed and then sit back and simply expect the hungry to be fed. We don't pray for equality for all, then just sit back waiting for legislation to be passed. Because it won't unless we do something about it. And it won't because God doesn't bring about change from a distance, but from within flesh, amidst flesh. Change is brought about in wombs. Change is brought about in hearts and in minds and in bodies that are moving and taking action. Even if we can't move very well, we're still moving. Bodies that are creating, bodies that are speaking out, bodies that are painting and dancing and loving and protesting, and in bodies demanding, not asking for, demanding new and transformative worlds. God gives birth to these bodies, our bodies. God gives birth to revolution through our bodies. God gives birth to liberation and transformation through our bodies. And we get a peek at this new and transformative world in Mary's Magnificat. And we see a glimpse of this partnership with God through Mary herself. And in this world, in this life, we create together with the divine, equity becomes the overarching ethic. Not making those who are poor rich, not making the rich poor, not practicing an eye for an eye, but instead throwing out, getting rid of all forms of destruction that keep anyone from flourishing. Of course, when we read the lines from the Magnificat, such as, "You have deposed the mighty from their thrones and raised the lowly to high places," or "You have filled the hungry with good things while you have sent the rich away empty," we might wonder where the equity is in this, right? Some argue, and rightfully so, it's a legitimate argument. Some argue for a reading of this text as what we might call God's great reversal. What is low is brought up high, and what is high is brought down, so that positions are exchanged. But Black womanist theologian Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, who is a former professor of mine, she believes different. She explains that in Mary's day, access to the legal courts depended on access to resources. Those with nothing to bring the rulers were rarely granted access to the courts of justice, while those who came bearing gifts were given unlimited access and probably more than a little favor with the courts. And so Dr. Douglas suggests this, quote, Mary sings then not about a reversal, but about equity. That is about an even-handed fairness where all are considered equal and are rendered equal to one another. So the last will be first and the first will be last, because in the end, such hierarchical distinctions of inequality will not exist. So essentially, the first and the last will be the same. All will receive equal justice and thus equitable treatment in the court that is God's future, unquote. So in essence, even though Mary is singing of reversals, in God's kingdom that Mary also sings of, there is no hierarchy. So there are no reversals necessarily, but a flattening of access. Now, I've spoken previously on the idea of liberation theology, and this notion of equity is at the core of liberationist thought. Through this theological perspective, while God views the world through the eyes of the oppressed, everyone still needs redeemed, whether oppressed or oppressor. As Dr. Douglas suggests, the first and the last are the same in the divine equation. But it should be pointed out that when we talk about equity, some folks mistake that for talk of equality. But while equality treats everyone exactly the same without taking into account additional factors such as histories of oppression or implicit bias or individual circumstances or social privileges, equity treats people fairly based upon all of these factors. And this is important because this practice of equity is the kind of moral imagination and vision embodied by Mary in her song. Moral imagination that goes beyond mere reversals. Moral imagination that looks more creative than small-minded retribution. It's a moral imagination that furthers the flourishing of life by resetting the balance of life. Because the goal of partnering with God for the healing of the world isn't simply to change who is in power or even who has access to power. If we are keeping the same values and the same institutions in place, only exchanging the people in charge, we ultimately end up furthering the norms and injustices we are fighting against, but now it's just under new ownership. And so the moral imagination that Mary shows, being able to envision something entirely new, this becomes vital for breaking patterns of oppression and destruction. Because if the Christmas season should teach us anything, it's that God has given us, all of us, the ability to birth something new, whether in our homes or in our churches or in our towns or in our romantic relationships. The figure of Jesus comes to represent a whole new system of living that is based on equity. One in which compassion and transformation and a mind for the individual as well as the collective both are all built in. This is what Mary sings of this morning. This is what she hopes for, what she dares imagine and to dream of. And during this time of Advent, it's important to remember that Mary refuses to be constrained by the what is, and rather she is literally giving birth to the what can be. There's a famous gospel song that asks, Mary, did you know? Do you guys know this song? It's oddly enough called Mary, Did You Know? And one of the lines is, Mary, did you know that your baby boy has come to make you new? Narratively, of course she knew this. This is like the ultimate version of mansplaining for all time. Asking Mary, did she know? Narratively, she literally got visited by angels. It was confirmed by Rachel. I mean, there's just such an annoying song. But you just have to read the Magnificat to understand that Mary is not some poor damsel in distress here. She was quite aware of the power that was growing within her womb, and she sang of the possibility of a new world being birthed through her. And we mustn't quickly move past her song, a song conjured in the midst of fear and violence and terror. We can't blow past her song just to jump right into Christmas, because that would be a terrible mistake. But we should dwell with Mary. Speak with Mary. Understand Mary as far more than, as one hymn uncomfortably puts it, a humble home for treasured seed. That hymn was written in the 80s. Mary is someone at the bottom rung of privilege who dared to imagine that amidst the fear and the terror and the oppression that she faced, a new, hopeful, and peaceful, and joyful, and loving world was possible. And so, as I finish here, and Brian gets ready to play the reflection song, ask yourself this. How does Mary's song, how does the Magnificat encourage us to break free from the power structures we find ourselves living under today? What can we imagine differently as individuals, or as a congregation, or as a larger community around us? And are we ready, and are we willing to allow the divine Spirit to lead us there? May it be so.
I could just sit and wait for all your goodness, hope to feel your presence. I could just stay right where I am and hope to feel you, hope to feel something again. I could hold on to who I am and never let you change me from the inside. I could be safe here in your arms and never leave home, never let these walls down. But you have called me higher, you have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. You have called me higher, you have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. You'll lead me. I could hold on to who I am and never let you change me from the inside. I could be safe. I could be safe here in your arms and never leave home. Never let these walls down. But you have called me higher. You have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. You have called me higher. You have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. You lead me, Lord. I will be yours, so I will be yours for all my life. I will be yours, oh, I will be yours for all my life. I will be yours, oh, I will be yours for all my life. So let your mercy come. Oh, I will be yours, Lord. I will be yours for all my life, so let your mercy light the path before me. You have called me higher, you have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. You have called me higher, you have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. You lead me. You lead me.
When you read Mary's Magnificat, what in particular jumps out at you? Is there anything special about Mary's Magnificat?
The idea that she is so young, and we do not attribute the youth such abilities to think so deeply and so impactfully. And young people have incredible depth to their minds,
Yeah.
and their offerings. And this is a young person in a pretty intense situation
Absolutely.
that we look at each year. And I think it helps us to have new eyes.
Absolutely. And even if you approach it from a narrative standpoint, that someone is, someone is writing this story. It's not necessarily exactly what Mary said, that there was still within the writer's mind this desire to portray Mary in this way as someone who was not going to shrink, someone who was not a little waif who needed rescued, but someone who boldly sang about justice and equity within her song. So historical or not, it's what the purpose of the narrative. And for that time and place, first century Palestine, to paint a woman with that regard is pretty extraordinary. Is pretty extraordinary, especially a young woman, right? Well, let's go into the next question here real quick. In today's message, we discussed moral imagination. Why is having a moral imagination important? Go ahead, Ann.
I may be really off center, but I think moral imagination addresses the goodness in all of us, and goodness transcends everything. I mean, that goodness, if we think about it, we are going to approach things differently. Each person in this church, what may do something, may be proactive, in their own way.
Right.
But the basis is that goodness in all of us. And so moral imagination, I think, gives us many different ways of looking at things and being proactive.
Okay, good.
Not just sitting and, not just thinking about it, but doing it.
Yeah, nice. Anyone else? Moral imagination. Kathy, right behind you.
Well, it's why I love this church, because it provides a venue for reimagining the world instead of being caught up in the societal standards that we were brought up in.
Yeah.
And we need to imagine it before we reach for it.
Yeah, and the last thing you just said there, Kathy, moral imagination sets our tone, right? Moral imagination becomes the destination by which the direction that we're headed, right? So then that's where we pour our resources and that's where we pour our time. The direction we're going to, through our moral imagination, guides where we direct those resources. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. The thing that gets me about moral imagination is like, I feel like white people have one of the greatest moral imaginations because it's like all of the natives that were murdered. And for some reason, we feel like we're in tune with God. Even though Jesus said you build temples for the prophets who were murdered. And you tell yourself that if you were alive in those times, you would not have taken part in the murder of the prophets. But Jesus said, actually, you actually put the guilt on yourself by saying that. And you give a tenth of your tithes, you give a tenth of your mint, but you neglect matters of justice. And it's like, I think white people have the greatest moral imagination because it's like they neglect all that justice, yet they feel like they're at one with Jesus Christ. And this is the thing, if we love Christ, why is it such a superficial surface love? And we return to the racism of America. We return to our standards of this country, even though we love Christ and Christ says, defy these corruptions. You know, but we adopt and obey them. Look around. It's not even one black person here, or not even any other race. And I feel like that's something we should be crying about, not laughing.
Absolutely.
Because all those minorities who probably would be here if it was not for the injustices that we neglect.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Powerful words.
I pray that we get some more minorities in this church, and that, you know, not like the token ones. I'm talking about just authentic, regular minorities, and just let them say outlandish things that make us realize our social divide. You know, we need that. You know, we can't keep depriving ourselves of basic interactions that God designed us to have.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that for me, moral imagination is nothing I've ever thought of before, but what I really appreciate about the message and that in general is that it doesn't keep things stagnant, that we're looking to grow through moral imagination. And I think that is key to everything.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Thank you. As part of our moral imagination as a church, one of the things that we have, I think, decided to invest what limited resources we have is into creating safe spaces for LGBTQ plus youth and adults within this county. And so another program that we're doing is the Safe Space Dinner on the 21st.
Joy to the world, the Lord is come. Let earth its praises bring. Let every heart prepare Christ's room. Heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing. Joy to the world, the Savior reigns. Let all the songs implore, while fields and floods, rocks, hills, and plain repeat the sounding joy, repeat the sounding joy, repeat the sounding joy. Christ rules the world with truth and grace, and makes the nations prove the glories of God's righteousness, and wonders of God's love, and wonders of God's love, and wonders of God's love. Amen. It's good to be with you all.
We go in the assurance that God intends good things for us, that God intends good things for the earth and every living creature. The God who liberates the oppressed, who heals the hurting, who frees the captive, desires to bring forth new life among us. And so with joy, we go in search of the Christ and every sign of love enfleshed. May it be so. Amen.